What exactly are Elon and Vivek going to do you think, with this DOGE enterprise?
Well, I think they're bringing an exhilarating rush to the system of creativity, outside the box thinking, comfortability with risk and leverage. And
boy, they are comfortable. Both those guys are comfortable with risk.
It's amazing. And the reason I love it is, in some respects, this does feel like an intractable problem that we're up against.
Yes,
and
exactly.
I don't think it is, but I think it feels that way. And we're bringing people that are trying to get to Mars. So I'm pretty sure they can handle, the ability for us to balance our books and run a government that's much more efficient. So I think that the things that I've heard them say are things like really going after, or from a deregulatory perspective, all of the recent court cases that have said and chopped at the feet of this administrative state. You don't have the ability to just come up with new major questions, rank and file agency. You've got to have actual specific language from Congress. You don't have the ability to get the deference for every position that you've taken just because you're a federal agency. These have been big axe cuts at the administrative branches. And so I think what they want to do is to use those as the basis for a massive deregulatory agenda and game on. I also think they want to look for as much that you can do to start cutting costs without Congress or with Congress, but to be really aggressive in some of the areas that I've mentioned. Impoundment would be, a huge part of that, the ability to just not spend the money. And then of course, being as radical or aggressive as you can in eliminating and reducing employees, full-time employees, individuals, and going after contracts that make sense. So I think that that's where they're headed, and I think it'll be an enormous boon to the country.
Can you do it so neither one of them is going to become a federal employee himself? That's my understanding, correct?
That's my understanding as well.
I mean, they're not. I'll just say that. So how do you do that from outside?
Well, I think that they will be working with the agencies that do this. I think they'll be working with OMB, whoever's in that role. They'll be working with Treasury, who's ever in that role. And they will be rallying the theory of the case. I think ultimately that's what's most needed, Tucker, is a specific theory of the case about what can be done.
That's right.
And then you give it to the people, and hopefully that's been a two-way conversation, but you give it to the people that are on the president's executive team and his administration, and they run with it. And then you've got DOGE out there providing a political support for what must be done.
Do you remember when Democrats used to refer to abortion as something that should be safe, legal, and rare? Well, they've changed their view on that. It went from a right to a sacrament. This isn't the pro-choice movement you may remember from 30 years ago. This is something much darker. And that's why we have joined forces with Preborn. They're a sponsor of the show and of our speaking tour, to do something about it. It's the largest pro-life organization in the United States. And they are doing what they should do, which is speaking up against this atrocity. Killing babies after birth? No one seems to have the bravery to call that wrong, which it is. But Preborn is calling it out. Their networks of clinics are positioned in the highest abortion areas in the country, and they've rescued 300,000 babies. When a woman considering an abortion searches to end her baby's life, Preborn is there. The power of ultrasound, combined with the love of God, doubles the baby's chance of being born. A single ultrasound costs $28. 5 ultrasounds are $140. Giving women the information they need to make the decision that many of them actually want to make, to have a baby. Any gift will help, and all gifts are tax deductible. To donate securely, go to preborn.com/Tucker or call pound 250 on your phone, and when asked, use the word baby.
Even just to publicize the ideas, the U.S. government at this point is like a bankruptcy or stage 4 cancer. It's like so overwhelmingly bad that you don't see a way out of it. At least that's how I feel when I assess it from the outside. Like, how would you even fix something like that?
We haven't had any spending reductions in like 20 years, right?
But we're bankrupt, right?
But we're bankrupt, and there's just this notion that nothing can be done about it. We still pass $100 billion Ukraine checks. Even if you thought it was a good idea, you can't afford it. You never have the affordability conversation at all. And
is that true?
It's totally true. Like literally, no one ever talks about affordability of what we can do.
And these foreign heads of state show up and like demand money from us. And nobody ever says, you know, I like your country or I don't or whatever. Or I think you've got a good point, love to help you, but we're just out of dough. Like nobody even suggests that or dares think that. Like, what is that?
They just assume the gravy train's going to keep on going. I dealt with the most within the military, right? But like,
what's that like?
Well, they.
Well, you've got some road miles on you. You've done some stuff.
Well, you know, I want to understand these things. I want to understand these systems and these institutions, why people say that what they do. And there's no understanding whatsoever. There's like no fiscal conscience at all with regard to the individuals. It's like, nope, we've got to perform a particular function in the world. I read that somewhere in my educational system. I now believe it. Doesn't matter whether that was never voted on. It doesn't matter if that's kind of anathema to where our founding fathers would have envisioned. And so we are going to maintain our presence everywhere in the country. I, the military, get to define my requirements about what's necessary to win that military objective. You, civilian, don't get to ever question my requirements. Those requirements now automatically cost X amount of money, and we wonder why we can't ever have any cuts to defense, and we wonder why then defense spending becomes the Praetorian Guard for the non-defense spending. Right.
Okay. I know what you're talking about, but will you flesh it out a little bit? Because I think you've hit on one of the keys.
So for what we have been unwilling to cut any non-defense spending, the bureaucracy, which is the quote discretionary spending, members have a vote on it every single year. They don't have a vote on entitlements. Those are on autopilot. They have a vote on the bureaucracy. So everything they hate about government, their members are voting on. We haven't been able to have cuts to non-defense, not because Republicans are unwilling, although many of them are unwilling as well, but because there has been a view that those two things have to be constantly considered together. And the Democrats insist, and Republican hawks insist, that defense has to be growing at X% to deal with the threats in the world. And that requires you to then bring additional non-defense spending to be able to be for that political coalition. And ultimately, if you get your average Republican member, they ultimately care a lot more about the defense stuff than they do about the bureaucracy.
Can you say that again?
Ultimately, you have your average Republican member cares more about the military-industrial complex than they do about the woke and weaponized bureaucracy that is oppressing their...
They care more about flexing their power abroad than about fixing their own country.
I think that's
I know that's true because I know them. They have zero interest in anything that's happened. Not zero, but they have very limited interest in what's happening in the United States and the 100,000 people dying of drug ODs every year. Yeah. That's bad. Yeah, it's so bad. Ooh, my heart bleeds. The invasion of more than 10 million foreigners into our country without permission. Oh, that's so bad. Yeah, got to seal the border. But what they really care about is toppling some government they don't like or moving missiles to this military base or whatever. And why is that?
Well, I think it goes to the unhealthiness of the Republican coalition for like 50 years, but particularly since 1989.
Tell me what that means.
So your kind of National Review coalition, your fusionist Republican coalition was anti-communist.
Yes.
It was social conservatives, traditional conservatives.
Yes.
And it was kind of fiscal libertarians, right? Mm-hmm. That was your coalition.
Absolutely.
And it worked until, at a certain level when we had the Soviet Union. But when we don't have the Soviet Union, it kind of takes on a life of its own. And now you have to keep us everywhere in the world to be able to justify all of the institutional buildup and the complex that has been built up, all of these defense industrial companies and things like that. And Pat Buchanan actually talks about this in his book where he says, look, this was a specific strategy hatched out of the Department of Defense by some of the neocons at the time to be able to continue to justify the largesse from a defense standpoint that we continue to be tied down to. That, I also think, is so that's a big part of, I think, why your average Republican that grows up thinking like, okay, I'm going to be pro-defense, I'm going to be free market economics, and I'm going to be a social conservative at best, right? That's what you grow up to be.
100%.
And you don't actually then think through, okay, well, what does that mean? Does that mean I have to then be for every war that's been hatched?
Right.
Do I not to be for making a defense that we can actually afford? Does that mean that I think that from an economic standpoint that we're not actually citizens before we're consumers? Like there's just a lot of unhealth in all of those.
Yes, and it's not a natural coalition. I mean, famously, you see this in the Democratic Party where you've got, Hispanic immigrants alongside transgender activists, and they clearly have nothing in common. Everyone says that. But fewer say the obvious on the Republican side, which is that social conservatives aren't natural pro-war people. Most of them are Christians, for one thing. So why would they be in favor of killing innocents? Like, they're not actually. They're believers in a religion that specifically prohibits that, specifically and repeatedly. So I don't know how they've hung together for so long. I'm obvious about my position on this.
Right.
I find them repugnant, murderous. So that's my view. But I don't think I'm alone in that.
Like, why
right?
are Christian conservatives naturally defense hawks? Like,
That's what I'm saying.
Not just defense hawks, war hawks.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. We hope you'll subscribe to it. And by the way, you can hit the little bell on there and get notifications every time we produce a video. We hope you'll do that also.